Welcome in, everybody, to Betting Pros College Football Week 9 Look Ahead. And who am I? Yes, it's Chris Welsh. You've heard me maybe over on Fantasy Pros, maybe not. I don't know. But I'm going to be filling in through hopefully the rest of the college season here to hang with my buddy Thor Nystrom as we are going to be doing the Look Ahead show. You can find me on Twitter at @IsItTheWelsh if you would like. But all you're going to get is my manic college football bets, which I'm usually tailing the likes of my buddy Scott Bogman, of Thor. I'm going to be tailing these guys. Wake Forest, thank you very much this weekend. And Thor, we're coming off of a week 8 that didn't have a ton of crazy movement, I don't believe, off of the top 25. We had a few, nothing in the top end, a few big changes here before we look to week 9. Any big major takeaway you're going to be stepping into week 9 with?
From this past weekend?
Yeah,
I mean, just another great weekend of college football. Yeah, we didn't have the matchups that we had the week before, but we still got a whole bunch of interesting games. I thought it was interesting. Oklahoma State, with a compromised Spencer Sanders, was able to come back on Texas, had a dominant second half. I'm sure we're going to talk about TCU and Kansas State a little bit. I thought it was interesting, too, that the TCU basically did the same thing after Kansas State started to have a rash of injuries during that game. But yeah, lots of interesting games this past weekend.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing the look ahead here as Thor's going to give you all the information that he has got early on. And obviously, you can follow him all week long as you're going through and you're making all of your picks. We're going to do the very, very early look through, but make sure to follow him at 4KU on Twitter so you don't miss anything. So let's just jump right into it. Thursday, we've actually got 2 ranked teams playing. First up, you got Vatech, who's 2-5 up against NC State, who moved to 24th on the AP Top 25. They're 5-2. Talk to us about Vatech and NC State on Thursday.
Well, the big thing on the NC State side, remember again, Devin Leary, their starting quarterback, is out for the season. So we're going to get Jack Chambers again, who is not nearly as good. It's an enormous downgrade for them. After the bye week, they've gotten a chance to get a little bit healthier. They had other guys on their depth chart that were beaten up. You'd expect them to be a little bit fresher for this game. But again, Leary's going to be out. So you have to downgrade NC State quite significantly. Virginia Tech was a team we downgraded significantly in middle of September. Can Virginia Tech score enough points to be viable in this game? With the line opening up around 14.5, I would lean Virginia Tech early in the week. Again, with Jack Chambers starting at quarterback for North Carolina State, feels a little bit much. My adjusted line on that game is NC State minus 13.3. So showing a little bit of value on Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and I saw even over on a couple different spots, they may have been taking your route where I've even seen some adjusted lines down to like 13. If you just peruse ESPN, they've got a little marker there that's now showing NC State by 13. So
yeah. No surprise that the money's coming in early on Virginia Tech at all. Word open, yeah.
And that's a really, really early movement, especially because, for everybody to know, like, there's like a 6-hour window between like when this information was posted on here and when we're even talking about it. So that might really tell you where this game is headed and might be one on the docket. We've also got the now number 14 Utah, who's 5-2 up against Washington State, Pac-12 matchup, 4-3. What do we think on this one?
Yeah, another game where the teams are coming off of byes, so that sort of nullifies it. Utah had the big win against USC. Prior to that, I'd be like right now with where that one was. It opened up at 7.5 that I had seen. My line on that game is Utah -9. I would expect the line to be closer to double digits by the time game time rolls around. I think that's probably justified in that one. The key for the Washington State side is, can Cam Ward keep down the turnovers against the Utah defense? If he can, Washington State could be viable as sort of the live home dog here. But Utah's secondary is very good, and Cam Ward is showing a propensity, this going back to his FCS days as well, to put the ball up for grabs a little bit. If he does that, Utah's going to flip the field on Wazoo, and the game could start getting away from Wazoo very, very quickly out there on the Palouse. But that's a game that I'm going to be digging into this week in my handicaps.
So obviously you're not making any picks necessarily on this show. We're just talking about the early stuff, and this is a look ahead. But when you look at these two games, The value based on your adjusted line versus what the public spread is kind of relatively the same. But do you think you're going to lean more Utah in the Pac-12 matchup versus this ACC matchup on Vatech and NC State?
Well, if the line on Vatech and NC State, if that's come beneath 14, yeah, then and the Utah Washington State one library is 7.5, then yeah, maybe a little bit more towards Utah. But like, if that line's over 14 with NC State, then I'm definitely playing on Virginia Tech. It's too many points. Again, with O'Leary.
When you get into bets, do you like to find yourself jumping in on the Thursday games a whole lot, even though it's a little bit early? Because I know you're going to wait a little bit later in the week where you're doing a lot of your over-unders and stuff. Do you jump in on the Thursday games more often than not?
I bet the Thursday games for sure. And if Thursday rolls around and I don't have a play on one of them, we wet our beak a little bit with like a quarter unit or a money line parlay. Last Thursday, we hit it right because I Virginia was a side that I like. Virginia +3 against Georgia Tech, and I sort of leaned towards Troy. They were also +3 against South Alabama, and so I parlayed the money lines of the two dogs in addition to the ticket I had on Virginia, and that worked out well. But yeah, this week we'll see if I ended up having an official play on the Thursday or Friday games. But yeah, if I don't and it rolls around, like just me personally, I wet my beak on them for sure because I'm sitting in front of the TV watching them. You got to have some investment.
I was about to say, Thor's like, hey, listen, Welsh, you're new here and everything, but like, come on, we're degenerates here. I'm the same way. Like, I can be 5 minutes before a game and I'm like, do I not have something on? We need to get going. We need to absolutely get going. So regardless, before we get into the Saturday games, this was something our mutual friend and one of my best friends, Scott Bogman, shared this with me. And I figure you're going to have a take on this. And this isn't something we're probably necessarily going to talk about, but this came out that the Iowa Northwestern over-under is currently set at 31.5. This was via Circa Sports. And if it holds, it's going to be the lowest game total in college football history. For what do you think about this bad boy? I know you have it on the spread side. You've already put it on your sheet, but the lowest total in college football history is theoretically on the line with Iowa.
Yeah, and it might be too high. That total anyway. Yeah, might be too high after watching both these teams play offense, particularly Iowa. I'm an Iowa grad, so I don't miss any of their snaps. And this year, I wish I had. But I mean, it's a justifiable total where they set it. The way that these teams play. And there was I saw on Twitter what was the closest to that of a game between two non-option teams. And there was one where it was like 33.5. Corey Cavender, I got to give a shout out to him because he was the guy that replied with that. But this was going back late 90s or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a historically low total. It was one when I was looking over the Circa openers. It dropped my jaw, and not because it wasn't justified. I was expecting a low total, but you see 31.5 on the page like that as a total. It was pretty surprising because when the Circa one, when they tweet it out every Sunday, I'm going through line by line, and you don't see totals that low. So it's that one's very interesting. It's going to be interesting this week to see where the money comes, and I hope the sharps love the under because I want that total in the 20s by the time that game kicks off. I don't know if we're gonna get there, but that would be epic, and it's going to be probably historical either way because I think that it would have to toggle up a couple points to even get above that other game that I was talking about years ago where it was 33.5, 34. Very low total.
Also, on your adjusted line, there's actually some value in there because you've got this over a 2-score touchdown in favor of Iowa, and it looks like it opened up around Iowa around 10. So this scenario, let's say it gets to like 29. Are you more likely to play the over on a 29? Or are you going to continue with taking the value on the spread for Iowa?
Well, I do show value on Iowa, and I do think there is some value on Iowa. I mean, circumstantially, the games that we're coming off of, which sometimes informs a lot of this, the perception of it. Iowa last week, obviously, they had just about the worst matchup that they can have for them with Ohio State. and they got blasted in that game. And then with Northwestern, they benefited from circumstances this past weekend playing Maryland after Talia Tagovailoa was ruled out. Maryland's backup quarterback's not very good. It's a similar thing with NC State, where you go from the stud quarterback to just some noodle arm scrambler that they brought in for depth purposes. But that kid shouldn't be on the field. And so Northwestern, they had a shot to beat Maryland in that game. They were actually leading at halftime, 17-10. They lose by a touchdown. But again, it's not as impressive as otherwise would have been, keeping it within 7 against Maryland on the road. But perceptually, I don't know that a lot of the entire betting market is going to recognize Tagovailoa wasn't playing in that game. You were playing against a depreciated Maryland team that was unable to leverage what their greatest strength is, which is their receiving core, because the backup quarterback can't throw the ball, which dragged Maryland down to Northwestern's level, as opposed to Northwestern playing up. I like Iowa in this thing. They're a lot better than this Northwestern team. This Northwestern team stinks. They're 1-6. They haven't won since the opener against Nebraska. And again, circumstances helped them in that one. Similarly to how they helped them in the game against Penn State 3-4 weeks ago, whatever. That game was in a monsoon. But when you just look at the box score, Northwestern only lost by 10 in that. So, I mean, Northwestern has this terrible record. But again, some of these games have been closer. But when you know the context, they shouldn't have been.
Well, my favorite tweets about this game have been, 31.5 is the over under, and everyone goes Iowa 31, Northwestern 0. So that's my favorite tweets about it, which we should all be looking for. Hey, friends, do you want to track all of your wagers in one place? Well, you've got to check out Betting Pros Pick Tracker at bettingpros.com/pick-tracking. It syncs up with your sportsbook to tally with your pick hits and which misses, and gives you a live look at what the public is doing, so you can use real-time tracking to determine which plays to make and which to fade. Get on the leaderboard and quickly become a sharp by using the free advice we offer over at bettingpros.com/pick-tracking. Do it today. Let's go over to the Saturday games, Thor. Looking over probably the biggest one, number 2 Ohio State 7-0 versus the now number 13 Penn State 6-1. This is going to be a powerhouse matchup. Talk to me about this game.
Yeah, I think where that line opened up, it feels to me a little bit inflated towards the Ohio State side, with the opening up at 14.5 for Ohio State, especially with that game being in Happy Valley. My adjusted line on it is Ohio State minus 12.9. You do have to mention Ohio State did get back. They got back Jackson Smith and Jigba in the last game, although he didn't do much, and he played very limited reps. He hadn't done much all season. We'll see if he's anywhere closer to 100%. But Ohio State has not needed him to have the number 1 EPA passing offense so far, or in the parts of the 3 games where he's played. They also got back Mayan Williams in that game. The good news on the Penn State side, Sean Clifford was able to play against Minnesota at least the first 3 quarters, and then they put Allaire in for the 4th quarter. But Clifford's going to be fine for this game. Penn State's without, or was without, their starting left guard in that Minnesota game. We'll have to check on his status because their backup center's hurt too. So Penn State was a little bit weak in interior offensive line depth during the Minnesota game. But obviously, Penn State just blasted Minnesota in that game. I think the market maybe is a little bit pessimistic on Penn State after they watched what happened the week before, where Michigan just played big brother with them and put their hand on their head, and Penn State was swinging and couldn't hit Michigan. But we've seen, going back several years, Penn State's been a little bit of a thorn in the side of Ohio State. Ohio State now, again, heading into Happy Valley. I think if that line's above 14, I would probably lead towards the Penn State side.
Is this going to be one of those games you think that is going to be just heavy betted because both teams, this is the big powerhouse game? Or do you think that line, kind of like you're speaking to, is going to hover right around that space that might take people out of it?
Well, that part's always interesting. I mean, Ohio State certainly is a public team. Will Penn State, will that side take the sharp action? We'll find out. But yeah, I mean, with where the line is now, it's going to need to take heavy money on the Penn State side to drop an E14. But we'll just see how it goes. But with it over 14, especially if it gets if it was to climb the other way towards 17, Penn State would be the side for me.
Okay. Another big dog one with 2 ranked teams. We've got 7-0 Tennessee, number 3 ranked in the nation, up against Kentucky, who's number 19. They're 5-2. And it looks like, according to your adjusted spread line, there is some value on this game coming into the weekend.
Yeah, my adjusted line on that game is Tennessee minus 9.8. It opens up at Tennessee minus 13.5. That's obviously both the books. I suppose the books anticipating how the market's love for Tennessee. Essentially, I feel like Kentucky is a little bit undervalued. Some of their down performances in the lot, like for instance, the South Carolina game, Will Levis wasn't playing. And now Levis is back to 100%. He had a turf toe injury, which typically is a 2-week injury. He was able to come back on in the second of those weeks, and Kentucky won that game. And again, now he's back at 100%. I feel like that this thing is inflated towards the Tennessee side. For me, that line should be right around Tennessee minus 10. So for me, early week, I'm leaning towards Kentucky with where that line is.
Do you foresee that this game could move in that other direction? Do you think you could see it get beyond it could get past 2 touchdowns, or you think it's going to move in closer to your line?
Well, I would assume Tennessee would take the money here. Yeah. I don't know if it's, does it get to 14? Does it get over 14? That I'm not sure of. We'll just have to see how much money the books are taking on the Tennessee side. But you would have to imagine that they're going to be at least be the public side in this game. Tennessee, not only are they undefeated, not only are they a prime playoff contender at this point, but they have week in and week out been cashing for bettors. I mean, even friggin' last week, I was in on Tennessee against Alabama. I was fortunate on that and some other folks as well. This past week, Tennessee goes and they host Tennessee Martin in what was the classic letdown spot of all time. Tennessee covered that game too. And I realize it's an FCS team, but a lot of times, the next week, you're not going to get the same kind of effort. But Tennessee been doing this over and over and over again. They have won the trust of the betting market. And, once that stuff starts to happen, you have to start to pay the tax. The books are going to start to imbue the lines with that. And that's what we're seeing with the Tennessee side. But on the other side with Kentucky, not only do I think they're undervalued, the metrics that they put up this season are also a bit depressed because you had the game where Levis was out. You had some of the sample beyond that. Levis was compromised during it. And by the way, that's not all, folks. Chris Rodriguez, recall, Kentucky's star running back, was suspended for the first 4 games of the season. And Kentucky had some problems running the ball early on in the season. The guy that they thought was going to take over for Rodriguez in September, like when he got suspended, was this kid named Ramon Jefferson that they brought in. He tears his ACL. So Kentucky was, for the first month of the season, they were playing with their 3rd string running back. Then after that, Levis gets hurt. They're ancillary stats that are making up a lot of these, both my numbers, also, the baseline for the books and the other power ratings out there for everybody else that does this. Kentucky's are just a little bit lower than they probably should if they had been full strength the entire season. I think they're the undervalued side. They're also a team that doesn't get blasted a lot, when circumstances are not going against them. I think they could probably get – I'm not certainly going to call them to upset or whatever, but I think that they can do some things here that can give – at least slow Tennessee down and maybe give Tennessee a little bit of problems as well. And we'll find out how that goes. But specifically Tennessee's pass defense, if Levis is on in this game, Levis is going to be able to feast on that thing. And Levis is probably looking at this as one of those NFL showcase opportunities against this undefeated team that, again, is a front runner potentially to make the playoff right now. This is a big game for his evaluation, and he's not going against a great Tennessee pass defense. So I do think Kentucky's going to be able to do more through the air than people probably anticipate. I will be looking at Will Levis over props in the market this week as well.
That's a great bet. Also, coming back to where you're talking about the letdown spot with Tennessee, I believe that number this week was 39 and a half, and they covered, which is going to have more public money and more confidence on the Tennessee side, which may move this line, to your point, which may end up having Kentucky becoming even more of a value in this game. Another big matchup, number 1 in the nation, Georgia, 7-0, going up against Florida. They're 4-3. There's a little bit of value on this line. What do you think about the number 1 team in the nation up against Florida, which, man, higher expectations for Florida overall this year, especially with Richardson. But what do you think?
Yeah, my adjusted line on it is Georgia minus 20.7. So it's around where the thing opened. My concern for the Florida side in this one is Florida's run defense is an abomination. Anybody can run on Florida, and that's what Georgia does. They're going to be blasting Florida's front off the line the entire game. The running back, the first time he's going to be touched is 4 yards downfield, if they can touch him then on any given play. Georgia's going to stampede them on the ground. This is going to have to be one of those games. If Florida is to cover or put any sort of scare whatsoever into Georgia, we're going to need Anthony Richardson to put back on the Superman cape like he had on against Utah in the opener, and where we've only seen it in spurts, flashes, a series here, a play there since then. But we need Utah Anthony Richardson to show up in this game, or Florida's going to get blown off the field in Jacksonville.
And I think we could use a little bit more of that big Anthony Richardson. I just want to see him in that opening day performance. That has stuck in my brain, and it hasn't left every time I look at them in a market to bet or anything like that. I think about that opening day with him, and we need that big play from him. One more on the big one. You mentioned TCU. TCU, it's a Big 12 matchup. 7-0 on the year, number 7 in the nation, going up against West Virginia. They're going to West Virginia, who's 3-4. It's a Big 12 matchup. TCU's 4-0 in the Big 12, 1-3 for West Virginia. You said you definitely wanted to hit on this. So what do you think on TCU here?
I would lean TCU. I would lean them even if my system wasn't showing that there's value on them, but it is. My line in this game is TCU minus 9.4. It opened curiously low at TCU minus 7.5. A part of that is West Virginia, of course, has a pretty good home field advantage, and they play better when they're at home. But I hate this West Virginia team. I've been fading them all season, mostly successfully. And particularly, I was talking about a key strength on weakness in the last handicap. We got another enormous one here, which is West Virginia has one of the worst pass defenses in all of America. It's not just the P5. It's all the way down. Anybody can throw on West Virginia. It is not hard. TCU, of course, has the explosive passing game. TCU's receiving core is one of the best in the nation. And again, they're going up against this crappy secondary of West Virginia's. And then the TCU running game is there as well. West Virginia is better against the run for sure, but TCU is going to have their lunch through the air. Expect a big game out of Quentin Johnston. Should be a big game for Max Duggan through the air in this one. I definitely lean TCU. West Virginia, to me, is getting closer and closer to the point where that team quits on Neil Brown. Before the season, I said Neil Brown wasn't going to make it out of the regular season. He's got a shot now to make it out of the regular season. He has 0 shot to go 6-6 this year. I think the best case scenario for West Virginia at this point is finishing 5-7, and we'll see if they can even get there. But once it gets to the point where the players realize, like, oh, we're not going to a bowl game, we've seen that already this season with the coach that was on the hot seat in West Virginia. The players certainly know that Neil Brown is. In some of these other, Arizona State, Colorado, Nebraska, it's some of these other ones where they fired the coach. The last couple of weeks in the lead up, the players just weren't showing up. And you saw some really embarrassing results because of that. West Virginia is not quite there yet, but they are moving ever so closely to getting there. TCU matches up really well in this one. And people have been anticipating a letdown spot for TCU at some point, but we haven't seen that. They've had some letdown first halves, right? Like, they had to come back in the last game against Kansas State. They were helped a little bit. I was referring to this before, where Kansas State had some injuries. They also had to come back on Oklahoma State, and with Kansas, they just held them off at the end. But you're now starting to see this battle-tested team. A team that last year was so bad, they got their head coach fired, the legend Gary Patterson, and they sort of had to learn how to win. Not only have they learned how to win under Sonny Dykes, they're beating all of these diametrically opposed opponents, and multiple times, like I mentioned, in recent history here, have had to overcome extreme circumstances in order to pull the win out. I trust this team going on the road to a place like this now. I definitely like TCU in that one.
Got me jacked up for TCU. Hey, friends, if you want a chance to win a signed T. Higgins Cincinnati Bengals helmet, courtesy of our friends over at Pristine Auction, all you got to do is subscribe to the Betting Pros YouTube channel right now. Just go do it right now. Comment below on this video, and then that's it. So subscribe and comment. Boom, you're set. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and claim your prize. How about some rivalry action, Thor? Michigan State. It doesn't quite look as pretty as maybe in previous years, but Michigan, number 4 in the nation, 7-0. Michigan State is 3-4. But you and the books got this line pretty close.
Yeah, well, you try telling that to some of my Michigan grad friends. They think this one is about as pretty as it can possibly get.
One.
Exactly, yeah. Boy, if I'm Mel Tucker heading into this game, I'm feeling pretty nervous. Michigan State has one of the worst defenses in the entire nation, whether it's by counting stats, whether it's the efficiency, the success rate, whether it's EPA per play against the run and the pass. Like whatever you look at, Michigan State is way down there at the bottom. And now Michigan, their offense, of course, they run the ball so well. They, now it's Corum and Edwards, but now you also have a more explosive element to the passing game as well. Man, I mean, like my line on this one is 20.5. The Vegas line opened at 21.5. I would certainly not be backing Michigan State in that one. It might end up being a stay away for me just because it is a rivalry game. Maybe they keep it a little bit closer, but I don't like Michigan State's chances in that game.
How about we go to the Ole Miss Texas A&M? LSU just gave Ole Miss a loss 45-20, which moved Ole Miss down a little bit. LSU moving up in the rankings in the top 25. Ole Miss is now 15. They're 7-1, coming up against Texas A&M, which is 3-4. Again, this is another one of those that is a very, very close line here. So what do you think on this bad boy?
Yeah, to me, this line opened spot on. My adjusted line on it is Ole Miss minus 2.6 in College Station. The line opens at Ole Miss minus 3. Again, spot on. Because I don't think perception's dragging this one way or the other, because both these teams are coming off really disappointing performances. I loved LSU last week. I also loved the under, and both of them ended up getting there. I didn't expect Mississippi to look quite as bad as they ended up looking. For LSU, that wasn't even a sweat. They just blew past them there once the gates opened after halftime. And then A&M, you just scratch your head, like what's going on with them? South Carolina controlled that entire game, and this is not a particularly good South Carolina team. A part of the problem for A&M, you have this antiquated, slow-moving, predictable offense, vanilla offense, which, has been sort of Jimbo's ethos going back several years. The problem with this team is you don't have any talent at quarterback, at least until Connor Weigman. Like maybe a couple of years down the road, Connor Weigman will become something. But Max Johnson was no great shakes, and now he's out for the season. Haynes King, we know, is not a guy that an SEC contender wants to be starting. And Weigman's a true freshman. And then A&M had a dearth of offensive playmakers. They really only had the two in Odchain and Anaya Smith. And Anaya Smith was knocked out for the season several weeks ago. So they're just so limited, and they remain predictable and vanilla and slow moving on the offensive side of the ball. And their defense, it's put up some decent performances, but it needs to be utterly dominant to make up for that offense. And it certainly has not been. I would trust Ole Miss in this one a bit more than I would A&M, even though it's flipping back to College Station where A&M gets to host this thing. Ole Miss is not as bad as they ended up looking last week. That was a really, really good spot for LSU. It's part of the reason why they were one of my favorite bets of the week. I early on in the week, again, I'm going to go into all these games and handicap them. But right now, I would lean towards laying the short amount of points with Ole Miss. And if you agree with me, probably one where you might want to bet it earlier rather than later to make sure that you get it at 3. As opposed to if it potentially climbs the other way, because I don't know who wants to bet on Texas A&M right now.
Great call. Really great call. Oklahoma State, who is number 9 in the nation now. They're 6-1, coming up against Kansas State, number 22 Kansas State, who is 5-2. Kansas State lost to number 8 TCU at that time, 38-28. Oklahoma State coming off of a huge win against Texas, which knocked Texas off of the top 25 in a 41-34 win. Oklahoma State, Kansas State. What do you think, Thor?
This is a big time health status check game where you're going to have to check it throughout the week for the Kansas State side. It's funny. Last week, when I was talking about the Oklahoma State and Texas game, it was all the health status on Spencer Sanders because we knew he had the throwing shoulder thing. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? If he does play, what percentage is he going to be? Et cetera, et cetera. And he did end up playing. And Oklahoma State was able to come back in that game in the second half and beat Texas. This time around, the health questions are decidedly on the Kansas State side. Kansas State probably would have beaten TCU, and maybe you can even take the word probably out of that, if they hadn't suffered this rash of injuries during that game. It was one of the most injury-riddled games you're going to see in the Power 5 this year. Adrian Martinez gets knocked out on the opening drive, and that actually turned out not to matter as much as you would think because Will Howard, their backup, he comes in and played absolutely awesome. Will Howard was a kid who was so ballyhoo coming out of high school, comparison to what Kansas State usually signs at, in recruiting, that initially Kansas State fans wanted him playing over Skylar Thompson. And then Will Howard had struggled a little bit. We hadn't seen him for a while, but he came in and looked absolutely awesome when Martinez got hurt. But then Will Howard got knocked out of the game as well. So then Kansas State was down to their third quarterback. Deuce Vaughn gets injured in that game for Kansas State. They had I think, three other starters that ended up. Daniel Green, Kansas State's top linebacker, got hurt in that game. Julius Brents, Josh Hayes, Ben Sinnott, all Kansas State contributors, they all get knocked out of the game as well. So Kansas State, by the end of that game, was the walking wounded, and that's why they blew this 28-10 lead and then ended up losing that game. What are the statuses of these guys? Are we going to get Martinez? If not, is Howard going to be available? What's Deuce Vaughn's status? He's the most important player on that team. And then the linebacker Brent's, what's his what's his status, right? Like, are they going to be Daniel Green, and then the guys like Brent's, Hayes, Sinnott, what are their statuses? If you're going to invest on the Kansas State side, you need to know the health statuses of all these different guys because of how many injuries they suffered in the last game.
Friends, have you been having fun listening to getting your side picks here? Not quite the full takes. You're getting a few little player props. Well, you can have twice, maybe three, maybe four times more if you want those free picks, player props, and breakdowns on almost every game the college football has to offer. You can join Thor and Mike for Game Day Live presented by DraftKings each and every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. You have questions you need answered. Our team of experts will be live for 90 minutes of nonstop action leading up to kickoff. So join the live stream and toss your questions into the chat. And I can tell you personally, watch it every single week. It is fun, it is informative, and it gets me going because I need that extra push when I'm making my bets because I am a degenerate. I'm a degenerate. If Thor gets hyped up about something, I'm already ready to go and bet TCU. I'm already ready to bet Ole Miss. I'm getting hyped up. I'm a total degen, and Thor helps me with that. So go check out Thor and Mike every Saturday. Thor, this is where I'm going to just give you an opportunity for your standout lines. Obviously, it's early. You're not making any picks, but a couple games we haven't talked about that stand out to you as far as what your projections have spit out versus what is coming out on the industry.
I got two that caught my eye. One of them I'm showing a decent discrepancy on. The other one, my line is exactly on what Vegas is, but they both caught my eye. So the first one, East Carolina is catching 3.5 points at BYU this week. I don't think that BYU should be favored. And I'm not really sure why they are after they just got absolutely annihilated by Liberty's third string quarterback, this Jonathan Benekit, who he'd never looked good his entire career. He'd also never had a successful game in his whole career. He absolutely shredded this awful BYU defense. BYU defense been awful all season. I mean, that was stunning, just Bennett being good, BYU's defense being that bad to facilitate that. But on the other side, that BYU wasn't able to do what they wanted against Liberty's defense. You give a little, you tip your hat a little bit to Liberty, but BYU is way down this year. East Carolina, I was talking about how LSU was one of my favorite bets last week. The other one was East Carolina getting 5 points against UCF. And ECU absolutely dominated UCF. They won that game by 20-plus points. I don't know why BYU is getting this excess amount of credit while East Carolina, again, is not. But my line on this game is ECU minus 1.3. That's just my system spitting out numbers. I would probably favor, if it was just me setting the line, like in a vacuum, where I would have ECU minus 3. I'd probably just flip the line. So ECU is a front runner to be one of my best bets this week, especially if that line stays above BYU minus 3, which is where it is right now. And then a line a game where my line lined up exactly with where the Vegas one was, but I still like a side. My line on Syracuse hosting Notre Dame, and this is a shout out for Thomas, who we did the show with him before. Syracuse is favored in this one by 2 points is where it came out. My line on it is Syracuse minus 2.1 against Notre Dame. I like Syracuse in that game, and I would even lay certainly 3, and probably even a tick more than that. I'd probably go up to 4. Syracuse is a better team than Notre Dame. Like at this point, it's a part of just the name value on Notre Dame. I haven't been impressed with Notre Dame all season long. I mean, you can go back and like look through last week against UNLV. Notre Dame finally beats a team by margin. Keep in mind that UNLV was without their starting quarterback, without their starting running back, and without their their top wide receiver. Just for starters. So you had this lower tier Mountain West team that was also injury decimated. Don't buy that, Notre Dame is gotten back on track. I certainly don't. Whereas Syracuse absolutely should have had, absolutely should have beaten Clemson and absolutely should be undefeated right now. They circumstances went against them in that one. They had a late hit, again on the quarterback, this roughing the passer, where they were going to get the ball back. Syracuse was when they were up by 2 possessions late in that game. Instead, Clemson gets to keep the ball. They end up scoring the touchdown, and then they were able then, a couple drives later to pull ahead of Syracuse. Syracuse wasn't getting the same calls on the other side with Garrett Schrader was getting knocked around, but far be it from me. Syracuse, though, a really, really solid team. They still are not getting the credit, I think, from the market that they probably deserve. For me, I really like Syracuse in that game. I expect them to beat Notre Dame.
The mighty Thor has got me jacked up. I am going to literally I have 3. I'm going to blind tail. I'm not going to even think twice about it. You got me jacked up about it. I hope he does for you as well. Make sure you guys are locked in over at bettingpros.com, where you guys can check all of the great content, all of the great articles, and make sure you're also paying attention to this YouTube channel so you can get all of the shows that are coming out this week, because Thor got you set for a look ahead, but you're going to get the deep dive into this week as you're preparing and making your bets for week 9. You can find him on Twitter at ThorKU. You can find me on Twitter at IsItTheWelsh if you just want to follow a degenerate. That's all that you would be following me for at this point. And thank you guys for all tolerating me. I know it's got to be I was telling Thor before the show, it's got to be kind of a weird vibe when you have someone the whole season and then someone just jolts themselves in. I'm quite different across the board, but hopefully, as I told Thor, I could be in the Minnesota talk, I could be like old school, like Ricky Rubio, just 11, 12, 13 assists, maybe 2 points here, 1 little point I'll throw in, but I'm just assistant Thor. That's all I'm here to be. So hopefully I'm not too much of a nuisance. So Thor, thank you for letting me get all hyped up with you this week, my friend.
Absolutely. And go back to the Minnesota thing. You did better than Minnesota's backup quarterback when he came in against Penn State. So that's a positive. First one good.
All right, friends, you know where to follow us on Twitter. Go over to bettingpros.com. Make sure that you like and review and do all the stuff with the podcast. Go win the autographed jersey. We'll be back with you again next week for an early look, but tune in all week long for all of your stuff coming up later this week. For Thor, I'm Welsh. It's Betting Pros, and we are out of here. Bye, friends.